Hello, Bravs. Despite my better judgment, I'm starting another book, The Seven Deadly Sins. Angus Wilson, Edith Sitwell, Cyril Connolly, Patrick Leigh, Fermor, Evelyn Waugh, Christopher Sykes, and W.H. Auden. 30 years ago, Ian Fleming had the brilliant idea of asking some of the greatest writers of our century to comment on their favorite deadly sin. The result was a brilliant, witty, and incisive book that includes everything from Evelyn Waugh's sprightly commentary on sloth to W.H. Auden venting his love of anger. Here are these 7 essays. This feast of wit, erudition, and delightful irony is for everyone who has suspected that the 7 deadly sins have always had an undeservedly bad reputation. It is a must for every lover of literature. As you can see, I believe this was the original artwork in the book that came out in the 60s. I will read each thing in a separate video. This is from 1962 was the original. So this must be 1992. Foreword. I will read the foreword, then I will read the introduction in separate parts. Foreword by Ian Fleming. Guess I could do an introduction on the illustrations. A note on the illustrations. The title page illustration is from a South German woodcut of 1414 and illustrates the world. Personification of the 7 deadly sins. The figure offers a cup representing gluttony. Her diadem represents pride, the bodice, lust, the severed left hand, sloth, the belt, covetousness, the wolf's head to the left, anger, and the dog's head, envy. The significance of the rest of the body is that the right leg represents life and the left leg with the snake's head, death. Where is it? There it is. The illustrations used with each of the essays come from a colored woodcut all in one piece entitled The 7 Deadly Sins and the Devil, now in the Albertina Collection, Vienna. It is dated 1480 to 90 and originates in the district of Constance. Foreword by Ian Fleming. I have various qualifications for writing an introduction to this series of distinguished and highly entertaining essays. First of all, I invented the idea of the series when a couple of years ago I was still a member of the editorial board of the London Sunday Times. This board meets every Tuesday to comment on the issue of the previous Sunday, discuss the plans for the next issue, and put forward longer-term projects. It is quite a small board of 7 or 8 heads of departments. I was foreign manager at the time, together with the editor and the proprietor, Mr. Roy Thompson. Another book that doesn't use periods on the abbreviations. And is that a British thing? And we are all good friends, though at this weekly meeting, beneath the surface of our friendliness, lurk all the deadly sins with the exception of gluttony and lust. Each one of us has pride in our department of the paper. Many of us are covetous of the editorial chair. Most are envious of the bright ideas put forward by others. Anger comes to the surface at what we regard as unmerited criticism, and sloth, certainly in my case, lurks in the wings. The same pattern is probably followed at all executive meetings in all branches of business. When someone else puts up a bright idea, however useful or profitable it may be to the business concerned, traces at least of envy, anger, and covetousness will be roused in his colleagues. Yet, on the occasion when I put forward this particular bright idea for the future, I seem to remember nothing but approbation and a genial nodding of heads. The project was outside my own sphere of action, and the paper and I heard nothing more of it until I had left the Sunday Times to concentrate on writing thrillers centered round a member of the British Secret Service called James Bond. So I cannot decide what troubles the literary editor ran into in his endeavors to marry the 7 deadly sins to 7 appropriate authors. So far as I can recall, the marriages I myself had suggested were closely followed, except that I had suggested Mr. Malcolm Muggeridge to write on the theme of anger, on the grounds that he is such an extremely angry man. In the event, as you will see, Mr. W. H. Auden was the brilliant choice. My next claim to introduce these essays was my suggestion to Mr. Lawrence Hughes, a friend of mine and a director of William Morrow and Company, that he should publish them in a book. Usually when one makes brilliant suggestions to a publisher, a dull gaze comes over his eyes and nothing happens. But in this case, Larry Hughes was enthusiastic and, despite all kinds of copyright problems, energetically pursued my suggestion and gathered these 7 famous English authors together between hardcovers. No mean feat if you know anything about copyright and literary agents, so you might think I could justifiably allow myself a modest indulgence in the deadly sin of pride. You would be mistaken. I have read and reread these essays with pleasure and profit, but their moral impact upon me has been uncomfortable. To be precise and truthful, the critical examination of these famous sins by some of the keenest brains of today has led me to the dreadful conclusion that, in fact, all these ancient sins, compared with the sins of today, are in fact very close to virtues. To run through the list, I have always admired the pride of Dame Edith Sitwell, the pride which, with her proudful brothers, has carried this remarkable literary family through battles of opinion and taste reaching back to my youth. The covetousness of Cyril Connolly, which he takes off so brilliantly in his piece of fiction, is one of his most endearing qualities, and he would be a smaller and less interesting man without it. The gluttony for life, food, drink, and women of Patrick Leigh Fermor are the essence of tremendous zest for everything. Lust, if Christopher Sykes is lustful, may he, and I for the matter of fact, long remain so. Envy has its ugly sides, but if I, as a second son amongst 4, had not been envious of my elder brother and his achievements, I would not have wished all my life to try and emulate him. As for anger, surely we all need more rather than less of it to combat the indifference, the I'm all right Jack attitudes of today. Of all the 7, only sloth, in its extreme form of accidia, which is a form of spiritual suicide and a refusal of joy, so brilliantly examined by Evelyn Waugh, has my wholehearted condemnation, perhaps because in moments of despair I have seen its face. How drab and empty life would be without these sins, and what dull dogs we would all be without a healthy trace of many of them in our makeup. And has not the depiction of these sins and their consequences been the yeast in most great fiction and drama? Could Shakespeare, Voltaire, Balzac, Dostoevsky, or Tolstoy have written their masterpieces if humanity had been innocent of these sins? It is almost as if Leonardo, Titian, I'm not sure how you say it, Rembrandt, and Van Gogh had been required to paint without using the primary colors. The truth, of course, is that generally speaking, these 7 deadly sins were enumerated by monks for monks, and one can easily see how mischievous and harmful they could be within a monastery. We do not live in a monastery, but in a great pulsating ant heap, and this brings me back to the moral confusion into which I have been thrown by these essays, and which amounts to feeling that there are other and deadlier sins which I would like to see examined by authors of equal caliber in a companion volume to this. I have made a list of these 7 deadlier sins, which every reader will no doubt wish to amend, and these are my 7: avarice, cruelty, snobbery, hypocrisy, self-righteousness, moral cowardice, and malice. If I were to put these modern 7 into the scales against the ancient 7, I cannot but feel that the weight of the former would bring the brass tray crashing down. But is this loose thinking? Could it perhaps be argued that if we are free of the ancient 7, we shall not fall victim to their modern progeny? I personally do not think so. But it would need better brains than mine and a keener sense of theological morality than I possess to pursue the argument As a man in the street, I can only express my belief that being possessed of the ancient 7 deadly sins, one can still go to heaven, whereas to be afflicted by the modern variations can only be a passport to hell. And by the same token, what about the 7 deadly virtues? What about the anal eroticism, which the psychologists tell us lies at the base of frugality? How much is charity worth when it springs from self-interest? Is political acumen a virtue, as practiced by the communists? What hell sociability can be? Where is the line to be drawn between deference and, not to use a more vulgar, hyphenated word, sycophancy? Neatness in excess becomes pathological. So does cleanliness. How often is chastity a cloak for frigidity? But I have held you for too long from these wonderful and in its different way exciting essays, and I must at all costs avoid that deadliest of all sins, ancient or modern, a sin which is surely more durable than any of those I have enumerated, that of being a bore. And we shall be back in the next video with the introduction, which luckily is only 4 pages. Goodbye, bravs. Goodbye.